Hi guys, so this is going to be a walkthrough for the Big Ideas Chapter 2 practice test that'll be due by the end of the day today. Again, it's Friday, May 15th. It'll be due at 11:59 p.m. So I'm going to talk you guys through some of these questions so you know how to do it as a review. Again, each week will be a new chapter to review from the past with this Big Ideas assessment at the end of the week. So the first question is asking to put a mixed number. Okay, so this is a mixed into a decimal. So the easiest way to get a fraction or a mixed number into a decimal would be to use your calculator and divide the top by the bottom. So right now we need to get 4 2/5 into an improper fraction to do that, or we can do 4 point and then we can get 2/5 into a decimal. So to get 2/5 into a decimal, you do 2 divided by 5 in the calculator. 2 divided by 5 equals 0.4. So that means that we have 4 and 2/5. So we have 4 and a 0.4, which gives me an answer of 4.4. Okay, for number 2, same kind of idea. We're getting it into decimal, but this one's already in an improper fraction, so I would just have to do 13 divided by 4, which would give me an answer of 3.25. Again, the answer is bigger than 1 because the top is bigger than the bottom. Number 3 says write negative 34 over 100 as a fraction in simplest form. Okay, so again, this answer won't be accepted as correct if it's not in simplest form. So again, we have negative, and since we have 2 decimal places, right, this is the tenths and this is the hundredths, that means that we're going to put the 34 over, again, it's negative, over 100 because it goes to 2 decimal places. Okay, if it was just, say, negative 0.3, it would be over 10, but since it's 2 decimal places, we put it over 100. Okay, think of it like money, right? If this is like 34 cents, it's out of one whole dollar, which is 100 cents. Okay, now in order to get this into my final answer, I need to simplify this. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, I know they're both even numbers, so I'm going to divide it by 2. I'm going to start there. 34 divided by 2 gives me 17. Again, we have a negative value. So once I get here, I know that 17 is a prime, right? Nothing goes into that. So I know that I'm done. So my answer would be negative 17 over 50. Again, don't forget to put that negative number. It doesn't really affect the math, but it's obviously has to be equivalent to that negative in the question. Okay, for number 4, okay, it says graph each number on the number line. Okay, so they give you options here, 11 over 5, 2 3/5, and 2.4. Okay, so obviously this 2.4 would go right there. Okay, I'm just going to color code these to make it easier for you guys. Again, you would be dragging them into the spot. Okay, for 11 over 5, okay, right now I have 2, 2.1, 2.2, etc. I don't know what this is as a decimal, so I'm going to get it into a decimal. Okay, so get to decimal. Okay, that's my goal, and the reason I'm getting into decimals is because that's what's in my number line. Okay, if I had fractions in my number line, that would be totally fine, but I need to get it into decimal form. So I'm going to do 11 divided by 5, which is 2.2. So this red box should go right there. Again, these are just matching up from the colors. And then the last one, 2 3/5. Okay, we did ones like this in the last page. I need to get 3/5 into a decimal. So I'm going to do 3 divided by 5, which gives me 0.6. So this would be 2.6, which would be over there. Okay, so that would be where I would drag that. Okay, so just placing those values. Again, this is really 2.6 just as a fraction, right? This red one is 2.2, but just written as a fraction. Same value, it's just presented in a different way. Okay, number 5, we have fractions. Okay, so anytime we're adding or subtracting, we need a common denominator. Okay, we can't add together things that have different denominators. So right now we have different denominators, so we need to convert those to have the same value. So we have negative 1 over 5 plus 17 over 10. Okay, the least common denominator here would be 10. Okay, so I'm going to keep this as is, and I'm going to change negative 1/5 into a denominator with 10. Okay, so in order to get from 5 to 10, I multiplied this by 2. So I'm multiplying the entire fraction by 2 over 2, giving me negative 2 over 10 here. Okay, so this value became negative 2 over 10 plus my original 17 over 10. Once you have it in that simplified or common denominators, you would just add those top values together. Okay, so don't forget when you have integers, you have to be careful with the positives and negatives. Negative 2 plus 17 would give me 15 over 10. And because I'm starting in the negative, right? This is 0 on a number line. I'm 2 over here, and I'm going plus 17, so I'm adding to the right. Okay, I'm going to look at the question and see what it wants it in. It says, write your answer as a mixed number in simplest form. Okay, so a mixed number needs to be a number with a fraction. So right now, 15 over 10 is not the correct form, right? It's the correct answer, but we need to get that into a mixed number. Okay, so 10 goes into 15 one time, and that would leave 5/10 remaining, but I know 5/10 is simplified into 1/2. So my answer would be 1 and 1/2. Okay, so I believe on big ideas you'd have to write 1 space 1/2 for that to give you the proper answer, or it might give you that calculator form. I'm not sure what you guys see exactly. Number 6 says find negative 7.63 plus 5.24. Write your answer as a decimal. Okay, so our question is in decimal and we are looking for it in decimal, so we're not going to have to convert after we solve this. Okay, so we have a negative 7.63 and a positive 5.24. Okay, so again, this was a long time ago, but I taught you guys a trick about how if you underline the bigger number, okay, so the bigger absolute value in this case would be the 7.63 because 7 is bigger than 5. Since this is the bigger value, I'm going to keep this sign as my answer. So I know my answer is going to be negative something. And then all you have to do is just find the difference between the two. So you would just subtract 7.63 minus 5.24. Again, you can just plug that into the calculator. 7.63 minus 5.24 is 2.39, but I know my answer has to be negative because of that first trick that I followed. Right, if I'm in the negative part of the number line and I add less than that to my number, I'm not going to hit 0 yet. I'm still in that negative. Number 7, we're dealing with variables now. Okay, so we have x's and y's involved. So it says evaluate negative 3x plus 5y. I'm just going to rewrite it over here. When x is 1/6 and y is 1/4. Okay, so all I have to do now, they're actually giving me what the x and y equal. So I'm actually just going to plug those values right in. So I have negative 3, x is 1/6. So I'm going to put 1/6. Plus 5, y is 1/4. Okay, I'm going to put these values over 1 because any number that's not written as a fraction is automatically over 1. So that way it makes it a little bit easier to visualize as I multiply across. So I have negative 3 times 1. Again, remember when you're multiplying fractions, you multiply the top and the bottom, so it's a little different than adding. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3 over 1 times 6 is 6. Okay, that's my first value, plus the second value, the 5y, I have 5 times 1, which is 5, over 1 times 4, which is 4. Okay, so now I'm getting into adding fractions like we saw on the last page. I need to get these into common denominators. Okay, for 4 and 6, okay, you can make a denominator of 12. Again, you can always make a different common denominator, like you could have multiplied these to get a common denominator of 24, which would have been fine. You would have had to just simplify that fraction later on in the question. Okay, so to get from 3/6 into something over 12, I'm doing 6 times 2. So I need to do negative 3 times 2, which would be negative 6/12. And then same thing here. To get from 4 to 12, I'm multiplying by 3 here. Right, 4 times 3 is 12. So I need to do 5 times 3, which is 15. So now I'm just going to add along the top. All right, my answer is going to be over 12. Negative 6 plus 15 would be 9. Okay, and again, this one is as a fraction in simplest form, 9/12. Right, I can reduce that. 3 goes into both of those. So 3, to break that down smaller, I'm going to divide. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So this would be my final answer, 3/4. For number 8, okay, same kind of idea with subtracting or adding fractions, same rules, but I have a mixed number here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get negative 5 2/3 into a improper fraction. Okay, again, to do that, remember I multiply the whole number with the denominator, which is 15, and then I'm going to add that 2 onto it. So 5 times 3 is 15, plus 2 is 17. So I have negative 17/3 minus 1/6. Okay, so again, just like with adding, I need to have a common denominator here. So I'm going to get the common denominator to be 6, because I have that as my lowest common factor. So to get from here to here, I'm multiplying by 2. So I need to do 17 times 2, which is 34. And again, that's a negative value. Okay, so now I have common denominators. So I can do my operation, which is negative 34 minus 1. Okay, so you have to be careful here. I have negative 34, and then I'm going one more in the negative. Okay, so I taught you guys that little trick where you can do plus the negative version, which will give you negative 35, and that's over 6. Okay, the question wants it as a mixed number in simplest form. So I need to see, okay, how many times does 6 go into 35? Okay, it goes into it 5 times. And again, this is a negative value, negative 5, and there's 5 left over out of 6. So that's my final answer for number 8. Okay, for number 9, we have a decimal question. So same kind of thing. I know that my answer is going to be negative because the 10.91 is bigger and that has a negative value. Okay, this is really the same thing as doing 8.76 plus negative 10.91, right? If I'm subtracting one value, it's the same thing as adding a negative 1. Okay, so I know my answer is going to be negative, and then again, I'm going to do 10.91 minus 8.76. Again, I'm just going to plug that into my calculator. 10.91 minus 8.76 gives me 2.15, but again, I know that the negative is bigger, so my answer is going to be negative 2.15. And again, it wants it as a decimal, so we're good. Okay, number 10, find the distance between 3 1/4 and negative 1 3/4 on a number line. Write your answer in simplest form. Okay, so for this question, I'm going to make a number line to show it to you. Okay, I know I have a positive value and I know I have a negative value. So I need to have a 0 in there at some point to separate my positives and negatives. Okay, so here I'll have negative 1. Here I'll have negative 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go to the right in my positive direction. That'll cover both of my values. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot both points. Okay, so I have negative 1 3/4 and I have 3 1/4. So I'm going to start with that positive value, 3 1/4. Okay, I'm just going to separate these into fourths, okay, because I'm dealing with the fraction. So I want to just break that down. Okay, I have 3 1/4, which would be right there. Okay, then I have negative 1 3/4. So I need to do the same thing. All right, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 fourths. So my negative 1 3/4 will actually be right there. Okay, the question wants to know what the distance is. Okay, so I would do jumps here. Okay, just to make it easier to see, I'm just going to create those quarters in every single segment. Okay, so this is where you have to just be a little careful. So I know I have a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, and it actually lands exactly on that. So that would be 5. Again, they don't want to know negative, positive. They are just asking the distance between. Okay, if it says what's the difference between, then it would be a little bit different because then you're actually subtracting. But here they just want to know the distance. So if I was standing on one side of the room and someone else was standing on the other, I could say, what's the distance between us? Say it was 8 feet. But then if I said, how far is this person away from me in relation to the front of the room, I could say positive or negative 8 feet from the reference point. But this just wants distance. Okay, number 11. Okay, so throw back to keep, change, flip for fractions. Okay, anytime you have dividing. Okay, so dividing fractions, and again, you should have looked at these on that Wakelet lesson plans. You have to do keep, change, flip. Okay, before we can do that, we have to make sure they're in regular fractions because you can't do keep, change, flip with mixed numbers. So negative 3 1/5 divided by 1 3/4. We can't do anything yet because we have 2 mixed numbers. So I'm going to get this into a mixed number. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16. So I have negative 16 over 5 divided by 1 times 4 is 4, plus 3 is 7 over 4. Okay, now that I have 2 fractions that I'm dividing, I can do my keep, change, flip. So again, I'm going to keep my first fraction, change my symbol to multiplication, and then I'm going to flip that second fraction. 4/7 will come from that 7/4. Again, I'm flipping the fraction. Okay, once you have that situation where you're multiplying the fractions, which is the last step, again, you multiply across. So I need to do 16 times 4, which should be 64, and again, it's negative, over 5 times 7, which is 35. Okay, this question wants it in a mixed number, of course. So again, we need to see, this one's a little bit tougher. We want to see how much times 35 goes into 64. It only goes in once. Okay, and again, I have a negative value, so it's negative 1. And then if I get 35 into 64 once, I need to know how much is left over. There would be 29 35ths left over. Not the prettiest mixed number, but that actually would be your final answer because 29, again, is a prime number, so I can't simplify that anymore. That's my final answer, mixed number in simplest form. Okay, now we're getting into some multiplication of decimals or rational numbers. So again, we had that triangle that I taught you guys about back in probably September or October, where we have the positive on top and the 2 negatives on the bottom. So you take your 2 values in your question and you mark those off. So I have a positive 4.3. So I'm going to mark that here. I have a negative 2.6. So I'm going to mark a negative value. And then whatever's left is going to be the value of your answer. So I know that my answer is going to be negative. Then all you have to do, since it's multiplication, you just do 4.3 times regular 2.6, and you're going to get your answer of negative 11.18. Okay, so do the trick first to see what your final answer is going to be in, positive or negative, and then you multiply or divide your regular values without negatives. Okay, number 13, I have a couple things going on. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow PEMDAS. Again, it's very rarely mentioned as you get past 6th grade, but that's always something that you need to remember. So first thing I'm going to do is parentheses. Okay, I need to do my negative 4 times, I'm just going to put it over 1, times 2 over 7. Again, I multiply across, which is going to give me negative 8 over 7. Okay, so now I have 5/6 times what I got for my parentheses, which is negative 8 over 7. Okay, then I'm just going to multiply across, right? These parentheses just mean multiply. So I'm going to do 5 times negative 8, which would be negative 40, and 6 times 7, which is positive 42. Again, this question's asking you for simplest form, as it will always, even if it doesn't say it. You know that's what we want. So it doesn't necessarily need to be in a mixed number. It doesn't say that. It just says write your answer in simplest form. Okay, so you could put it into a mixed number if you wanted to, or you could just simplify it differently. So I'm going to divide these both by 2 right away because I know they're even numbers. So I have negative 20 over 21. And I think that's the furthest you can go, right? The only thing that goes into 21 is 7 and 3, neither of which go into 20. So that would be my final answer. And again, it's negative because I had that negative value with the 4. Okay, number 14. Okay, we have absolute value. Okay, so these bars, negative 3 over 5th. Okay, absolute value, as a reminder, means how far from 0 on your number line. So any value that's an absolute value will be a positive because, again, you don't worry about difference. You're worrying about just how far it is distance-wise. So that actually turns into a positive 3/5. Okay, then I have plus 3/4, and this just goes back to a regular adding of fractions, which again I need the common denominator for. Okay, the common denominator here I'm going to use is 20. Okay, to get from 3/5 to 20th, I need to multiply by 4. I'm going to do a different color. Times 4 times 4, again, to give me that 20. 3 times 4 is 12. And then to get from 4 to 20, I need to multiply by 5. Right? 4 times 5 gives me that 20. And I need to multiply the top by the same thing, which is 15, right? 3 times 5. Then I just add 12 plus 15, which is 27 over 20. Okay, and of course we have one last step because the question wants a mixed number in simplest form. Okay, 20 goes into 27 only once. Just going to move over here. 1, and there's 7/20 left. Okay, that ends up being a positive number because that absolute value got rid of that negative sign right in the beginning. Okay, moving right along. Number 15, determine whether each product or quotient is negative or positive. So this is super helpful here. All right, so for the first question, again, you guys are just going to drag it in. We have negative 4 2/3 and a negative 3 1/5. They don't want you to find the answer. They just want to know if it's going to be positive or negative. Okay, here I have, I'm just going to draw a little one underneath. I have a negative and a negative, which means my answer is going to be positive. Okay, so this is going to be a positive answer. Okay, the next one, okay, this one you have to be a little careful with because you actually have an absolute value here. So this ends up being 4.23 times positive 2.16. So I have positive times positive, which would just be positive. Okay, that you don't need the triangle for that. That's something that you guys learned before we were even introduced to negative numbers. Okay, here, again, I have fractions or not. It's a positive and a negative, leaving me with a negative value. So that would be negative. And the last one, again, I have an absolute value here, which becomes positive 2.75 divided by 4.33. They're both positive. So that answer would be positive as well. So this is the only negative. Oops, sorry. Play bingo with my family on Wednesdays. All right, number 16. Gotta follow PEMDAS, so I'm gonna do this parentheses first. 3 over 4 plus 5 over 6. Again, we've done a lot of these by now, so I'm gonna kind of speed this up. Okay, I need a common denominator, which is going to be 12. To get from this to this, I'm going to multiply by 3, which gives me 9/12. To multiply by here, I'm going to give, multiply by 2. 5 times 2 is 10. Okay, which when I add together will be 19 over 12. Okay, So now again, that was what my parentheses was. So now I have 3/8 parentheses 19 over 12 minus 1/2. Okay, so again, for PEMDAS, we did our parentheses. Okay, there are no exponents. Now we need to do multiplication or division first. So I need to do this before I subtract the 1/2. Okay, so I'm going to multiply across. Again, I have 3 times 19. Again, they're both positive. So that would be 57 over 8 times 12, which is 96, minus 1/2. Okay, so here we have an ugly situation because you have very different denominators, but technically we can use 96 as the common denominator. Okay, this will stay. So my answer, or my setup will be 57 over 96 minus, to get from 1/2 to 96, I do 2 times 48. Okay, so this would be 48 over 96, right? Because 48 is half of 96. And then I'm just going to subtract 57 minus 48, which will give me an answer of 9 over 96. And I believe that 3 goes into 96 evenly. All right, moving it over here. So 9 over 96. Again, that's my answer, but I need it in simplest form. So I'm going to divide both of these by 3, because I know 3 goes into both of them. That gives me 3 over 96 divided by 3 is 32. And that is simplest form. Okay, so a lot going on there, but really that just boils down to PEMDAS and knowing that you have to get common denominators when you're adding or subtracting fractions. Okay, last few questions here. Number 17, the table shows the elevations of 4 mountains. Which of the mountains are taller than Snowy Mountain? So, Snowy Mountain is 1 1/5. Okay, so we've done questions like this in the past, right? When we have regular numbers, right? 1, 3, 8, it's very easy to compare which one's bigger. But if they're in different forms, it makes it a little bit trickier. So I think the best option here would be to get them all into the same form, and particularly into a decimal form. So I'm going to do 9 divided by 7 to give me that as a decimal, which will be about 1.285. Again, decimal goes on, but it'll give me an idea of how to compare it to Snowy Mountain. Okay, 1 1/5, again, which is our reference. We know it's going to be 1 point something, and I can do 1 divided by 5, which is 0.2. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for. This is my reference point. I want to know which ones are taller. So I'm looking for numbers bigger than 1.2. So right away, Blue Mountain is one of my answers. Okay, so I'm going to check that off. There might be more than one. Okay, next one, I'm going to do 9 divided by 8. Define that as a decimal. 9 divided by 8 is 1.125. So that one is not going to be my answer. We're just shy of the 1.2. And then the last one is actually already in decimal form. Okay, 1.35 is bigger than 1.2. So that would also be my answer. Okay, so Blue Mountain and Brook Mountain are both taller than Snowy Mountain. Number 18. Another table says the table shows the amount in gallons of gasoline in a car over a period of 4 days. What is the total change in the amount of gasoline in the car over the 5-day period? Okay, so if it says over a period of 5 days, I'm just looking for the total change. Okay, so I have negative 1.05 and I have negative 2.15. I want to know what that change is. Okay, so I need to do negative, right? If I'm trying to find the difference, I need to start with this value right here, because I'm finding the difference from when it ended to when it started. So I'm going to subtract negative 2.15 minus negative 1.05. Again, don't forget, if you have a subtraction and a negative, that becomes plus plus. So I have negative 2.15 plus 1.05. Okay, this goes back to that trick. 2.15 is bigger, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And then I'm just going to do 2.15 minus 1.05. And that's going to give me an answer of 1.1. Okay, so from the last day to the first day, or from the first to the last, it went down by negative 1.1. Again, the unit's already written there for you, so you don't have to write the unit. Number 19, a person who is 5.8 feet tall is standing in a pool. The top of the person's head is 1.6 feet above the surface of the water. How deep is the pool? Write your answer as a decimal. Okay, so for this one, I'm actually going to draw a picture. Okay, so here's my person. Okay, and I know that his head is sticking out. So this is going to be the water. Okay, so I know my person is 5.8 feet tall. So from where his feet are touching the bottom to the top of his head is 5.8. Okay, then I know that it says his head is 1.6 feet above the surface, which would be this distance right here, right? From the water surface to the top of his head is 1.6 feet. Okay, the question says, how deep is the pool? So they want to know what this distance is. Okay, so all I'm really going to do here is 5.8, right, which is that whole distance here, and I'm going to subtract this part away, minus 1.6. Okay, so again, seemed complicated at first, but once you draw it out, it makes it a little bit easier to see. I'm just taking the distance of that person minus how high his head is poking out to find the depth of the water, which would be 4.2 feet deep. Again, question like that, it's a word problem. It makes it easier for you to see, okay, does my answer make sense? So one thing, you need to make sure your answer is positive. Okay, you can't have a negative depth for this. And again, I know that the depth needs to be less than the actual height of the person because he's not completely underwater. He's taller than the water depth. So that makes sense. Okay, and last question. The table shows the balance in dollars of a bank account each month for 3 months. What is the average balance of the account? Okay, so we don't have any negatives here, which is nice. So it makes it a little bit easier to find the average balance. So to find the average, we always add up and divide by how many values we have. Okay, so I'm going to add this all up together. And I'm going to divide that by 3 because that's my 3 months. Okay, so my first value is 1,285.12 plus 961.36 plus 1,132 and 63 cents. Okay, that gives me a sum of $3,379.11. Again, that's added up as the balance, which you're not doing because that's your monthly balance. So maybe you added money, maybe you took money away, but they want to know the average. So now last step, I divide that by 3 to get an answer of 1,126.37. Again, the dollar sign's already there for you, so you just input this value for your answer. Okay, that's it. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and if not, have a great weekend.